Hi, I'm Micah Clark. Thanks for joining us this week. A very busy week at the Indiana General Assembly this week as far as many of the bills that we're watching. I want to tell you about a few of these. Many of them I listed in the Wednesday email, but I know a lot of people prefer to view the video. And I wanted to give you a little bit of an update on one of the bills I mentioned on Wednesday. And that is, so I'll start with that, Senate Bill 442. This is a school transparency bill. And so often I go down there, and it's such an alternative reality at the State House sometimes, because I think I go and I look at the bill and think, this is a simple bill. It's pretty easy, pretty obvious. Most people around the state are going to think, okay, that makes sense. I think this is one of these bills, but of course, it turned into well over an hour of testimony and pretty heated testimony. I was the only one who testified in favor of the bill. But 442 is a bill that passed the Senate, I think, with 39 votes. That's pretty much a party line vote. There's 40 Republicans there in the Senate. And the bill simply says that a school board members must review materials on sex education and human sexuality. And then they must post on the school webpage somewhere a brief description of whatever the school board chooses. Now, the bill doesn't tell the school board what to teach, if anything, on human sexuality. That's up to the local school board. That's local control. But the state, as a matter of policy, believes school board members should review curriculum. It's actually part of their job description. But a lot of times the school board members I talk to, so much of their attention is on financial things and other things with the school. And curriculum is kind of whatever the adoption committee suggests, school boards sometimes just sign off on it. In fact, Senator Gary Byrne, who'd been on the school board for 8 years before being a state senator, who authored this bill, said in the 8 years he was on the school board in southern Indiana, they never once discussed human sexuality or sex education curriculum on the board. And that the fact that this is a sensitive topic and something that parents are concerned about, I think rises to the level of having the school board approve this. School boards are elected. I think they're going to review this. It might actually help the school board avoid controversy. As I've said before, a school board member doesn't want to go to their Kroger grocery store on Wednesday and have some parent come up to them and say, why is my son being taught, about deviant sexual practices as a sixth grader? And the school board member said, I didn't know we were doing that. So I think it protects school board members. I think the fact that it's transparency and posting this on the school website, a lot of parents don't have time or don't want to bother their teacher asking them a bunch of questions. If they see what's being taught, I think in most schools, parents will say, that's fine, as long as it's age appropriate. There's polling that shows parents are not against sex education. They just want it to be decent and proper and age appropriate. Of course, we also see a lot of stories of strange things happening as well and things being taught that shouldn't be taught to kids. So this bill came up. I want to thank Representative Bob Behning for hearing this bill. He's the chair of the Education Committee. We weren't sure if that was going to happen. He decided to give it a hearing. I appreciate that very much because I think this is an important bill for families and for school board members and for teachers. But this transparency bill came up. I was there on Wednesday morning to testify, and I think there were 5 or 6 people who testified against it. I knew the ACLU would. Some of the school establishment would, and this time didn't happen in the Senate, but this time some LGBT trans activists got up and testified against it. But I testified that this is a transparency bill, think it's good things for families, and a state rep then decided to grill me afterwards. Actually, it was one of those typical things you see on TV. It was more of a dissertation on his part with no question. I couldn't figure out what the question was. It was him talking quite a bit. And one of the things I try to do, I'm not always good at, I want to persuade legislators. I don't want to turn a committee hearing or my testimony into being combative because that just invites more questions. You don't poke the bear. I'm pretty confident this bill is going to pass. So I gave a very, I thought, mild, positive, non-controversial testimony. Well, didn't work. I got grilled by one of the most liberal people in the Indiana House on the Democrat side. And he asked me something. He was really upset about one of the things in the bill says that you should inform parents if kids are separated, which used to be the way it was. Girls would be maybe with a science teacher, a female science teacher, boys would be with a male science teacher for a day when they go over sex education things. And that's how it was when I was in school back in the late 70s. And so I mentioned that because he didn't like this. He thought teachers are professional, doesn't matter if a male teacher's teaching girls, honestly, about menstruation, which I think a parent has a legitimate right to wonder if that's the proper thing, and they might want to hold their daughter out that day if that's the case. But it doesn't tell the school how to do it, it just says tell the parent who the teacher is on that day when kids are separated if they do that. It's simple, again, transparency. But he pushed and he poked and he pushed and he poked at me and said, why is this so controversial? He tried to make it a right-wing thing, and I kind of let my reservations go, and I said, well, it's controversial because, he said, why is it controversial today and not back when you were in school? I said, because when I was in school, Representative, we weren't telling little boys that they could be girls. And he said, well, there it is. He said, this is just a right-wing thing. This is all about, some stirring things up. And so I just left it, kind of smiled. Honestly, some of the Republicans smiled at me as I left. I sat down in the chair and somebody texted me who was watching upstairs and said, did this representative see who the first person testified on this bill was against it? Was that a man or a woman? We couldn't really tell. So, there is an agenda in sex education in some schools to blur the lines and to teach things I think are improper with an agenda, frankly, for the LGBT community. And we know that's going on. So I think this bill simply tells parents, this is what's going to be taught. Parents can know it. If they want to hold their child out from sex education, they can. If they want to talk to their school board member about it. But I also think school board members are going to be less likely to accept things that are controversial when they have to approve this when they're elected. I mean, that's how government works. They're accountable to the local voters, and they don't want to, like I said, go to the Kroger and get lambasted by people in their community saying, why is my school teaching this stuff that's bizarre or immoral? So that's the purpose of the bill. It's a transparency bill, and that's Senate Bill 442. And next week, I will have the vote on that, or at least let you know they're voting Wednesday. I probably won't have it in my email because I put my email out Wednesday morning. This committee hearing meets at 8:30. But they took testimony this week. Next week, they'll come back with amendments and a vote, and I feel pretty confident that will move to the full floor and move on through the House. A lot of bills have moved this week. You saw that in my weekly email. I'll pull up a couple here and mention. One was 326. This is a bill on crimes against children or child pornography. Changes some language in that for enforcement that's now called child abusive materials. But in that bill, they added an amendment that we like a lot that simply says, I think I have the language of it right here because I can't remember it. Anyway, it says that a public entity, a government entity, may not fund or host obscene performance. Obscenity is illegal. And again, that kind of sets some people off on the left. They're asking, what does this apply to? Is it drag shows? It's not what we said, but it does kind of tell you something. If people think a drag show is obscene, which is a pretty high level above even pornographic, that some of the content may be going on and some of those events are not good. But I think that's a good amendment. That moved through the House and on a 72-20 vote, which was very strong. So that was a good thing this week that happened. Another bill that we've talked about many times is Senate Bill 143, and that passed this week, I think, with 68 votes, 69-24. Senate Bill 143 is the parental rights bill. And I mentioned going back to 1995, I pushed the parental rights bill. We got all the way through the House and Senate, and it blew up in the conference committee, and we couldn't get it to the finish line. So this has been an issue for years. It's very similar language to what we have in the bill this year. It's been introduced 2 or 3 times previously. The House has passed it in previous years. This time, the House and Senate have both passed pretty easily a parental rights bill that says parents have the right to direct the upbringing of their child in health, religion, and education. And what this does is it elevates parental rights to the highest legal standard available. It's known as strict scrutiny in legal terms. Right now, the government can act against parental rights based on a rational basis, saying that they must be making a rational decision. This elevates that to what's called strict scrutiny, meaning when the government takes an action against the parent thinks their rights have been violated, the government has to prove that they're doing this in the least restrictive means and that they have a compelling government interest. If they can't prove that, the parent can win in court, and this will help parents, I think, who may have been mistreated by Department of Child Services or other areas in that bill that it really affects. So there's some specific cases we've addressed before in these videos where this would apply, and so I think it's a very good thing for parents. It doesn't pick winners and losers. It doesn't say a parent wins every time they make a claim or the government wins every time they take an action. It requires judges to balance these more evenly, where now their parental rights are here and government's up here. It brings them much more to a balanced approach, and that's all we want. So that's really all we can do legally. We can't pass a law that would fit every situation. It balances that more and elevates parental rights to a higher standard. We've had numerous attorneys explain this. It went through both the Judiciary Committee in the House and Senate, and the attorneys understand what this does. Surprisingly, when it passed this week in the House, there was no debate whatsoever on the bill. I thought there might be some because there were 28 votes against it, but the Democrats who opposed it didn't say a word. They kind of knew it was going to pass. Maybe they said all they could say. They just had a huge debate for several hours on some election bills, and maybe they were just picking their battles, or maybe thought it wasn't worth fighting. But the bill went through with 68% in the House and almost 80% support in the Senate. So Senate Bill 143, I think, will go to the governor in a few weeks. And again, the session has to end by April 29th. I pray we don't have a special session. I'll tell you, there's a little bit of talk of that. It always makes me nervous because I'm getting worn out. Legislators are surely worn out by this point. They don't want to have a special session on the budget or property taxes, but there is some question because you have this conflict between the governor, local government, and the legislature over how much property taxes should be cut, how they should be addressed, concerns from people about property taxes and assessments going really high. If they have a special session, and I hope they don't, but if they do, it would probably occur in May, and it would be limited to whatever issue they couldn't deal with. It wouldn't be a free-for-all where we have 100 or hundreds of bills or 1,000 bills filed again. It would just be the budget or property taxes or whatever those two things were, if those two things were not addressed by April 29th. Because constitutionally, they could actually not pass a property tax bill and sine die, adjourn it, be over until next year. But they have to pass a budget constitutionally. So most of the time when I've seen special sessions, I've only been a part of 3 or 4 in 30 years, it's over the budget. So we'll see what happens. There's a fiscal analysis coming out very soon that will kind of tell us what our projections are for revenue, and that we'll see they'll adjust the budget quite a bit, come to some agreement, and hopefully be done by April 29th. But we'll let you know. We'll stay on top of it. We've got some things we're watching in the budget, so I'm keeping an eye on that. But that's kind of where we are this week. Again, next week they'll take a vote on 442. And that's kind of the last bill I'm watching in terms of starting off with a bill number going all the way through the process in both chambers. There's not too many bills I'm still watching. Most of them have been voted on. But we do have a lot of bills on various topics, especially as this session winds down. We're seeing authors or legislators trying to author amendments and put those into bills because there were things they wanted that didn't get a hearing or didn't make it through both chambers. And that's not a bad thing, but we can have a lot of things still going on with amendments on issues we care about. So we're going to be watching the legislature right up until the last day they adjourn, which oftentimes goes up until midnight. We'll see what happens. But it's been a good session for families. a good session for AFA's perspective. In the next 3 weeks, we'll keep you informed of what happens at your Indiana General Assembly. And I want to thank you for your support of AFA during this time, and most of all, for your contacting your legislator, responding to our weekly email, and letting them know what you think on these bills. That means so much. It helps strengthen my voice down there when I'm at the State House, but it also helps us pass good legislation when legislators know these are things you care about. So thank you for that. I'm Micah Clark with the American Family Association of Indiana. Have a wonderful weekend.